Welcome to Esoterica, the podcast. I'm co-host Chris Schultz, and joining myself in the studio today is Mike Bodner of Uncle Sinner. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So I recently downloaded and have become a big fan of your latest album, Trouble of This World. I'm sorry. So I was wondering if you could give us a little insight into the making of that album.
It was something I did over the winter of like 2019 to 2020, just recording it in my basement. But some of the songs existed as demos, for years, and some of the songs are songs that I've been playing for a long, long time, like upwards of 20, 25 years in some cases. But I was sort of picking songs and organizing them around the theme of, I guess, creation and death, and just working through that, working through those concepts as best I could. So I would. So go ahead. Sorry.
I just asked I guess the silly question is, how does somebody from Manitoba become so interested in Americana? And
well, we have a really good folk festival up here in Winnipeg, and so I think I started going to that when I was 16, and I got to see a lot of people, great Americana people, play. I saw guys like Mike Seeger. I've seen Jody Stecker and Kate Breslin, people who got me interested in the banjo, people who got me interested in playing lap slide, lots of amazing blues people. So Winnipeg's pretty good for getting culture, even though we're in the middle of what's often referred to as a godless frozen hellscape.
Probably doing better off than us down here these days.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see how she ends up.
So what we usually do on our show is we like to go track by track with the album. Usually Aaron and I are just discussing it, but since we have the opportunity to have the singer-songwriter here, we figured we'd pick your brains on the songs. So the first track on the album, Creation Myth. Tell me a little bit about that.
That one started as a poem that I wrote one morning, like having coffee in about half an hour. And it doesn't rhyme. But I'd been listening to The Hill, which is an album by Richard Buckner, which is all based on the Spoon River anthology poems. And none of those rhyme. And it seemed to me that it was capable of being forced into a song despite the lack of rhyme. Mm-hmm. And so I tried that, and I tried to have it. I knew that if this was going to be a song on the album, it was going to start the album, because one, it sort of picks up where the last album left off on a really spare banjo track that ends with sort of faster banjo. But two, the nature of the lyrics speak of beginning, and it's about me in a sense, and how our worlds get created. I mean, I can tell you what it means to me if that's interesting to you. It's not necessarily what it has to mean to anyone else.
Mm-hmm. It is
but
to me.
Okay, so I mean, my mom died when she was 54, so that's where we start. I mean, it starts with the word say, right? This notion of the creation of the world through language, which is, biblical in a sense, but I'm not religious at all. I'm just sort of appropriating that a little bit. And so it talks about her, rising and falling in tangles of bare branches, right? So she's died. And then the second verse is about my dad passed. My first word was light. So the line is, say your first word was light. So, and my dad took that to be neither of them were super religious, but my dad took that to be sort of emblematic of something or other. And I think he wanted me to be a writer. So that's why I'm talking about him making me into a paper god, and, with my blonde hair, and ignition is just a sort of reference to the fact that he liked, he liked cars and that sort of thing. And then I move into just sort of the nature of the way that language and narrative, it's a way of working against the silence in ourselves, and also is our way of reaching out to the world. And in this song, of course, there's something shattered at the heart of it. And at the end, I guess I'm sort of putting the song and me into a geographical space. So the prairies where I'm from are very flat. You know, you think you could see the arc of the earth, right, without trees. And I was thinking of like that arc just sort of bending people back to me, both living ones and dead ones. And it's a sort of way of saying like this, we're going to be working through some stuff, including some people who have passed, but some people who are in my life now and are still alive. And so I end it with the word begin, which, you know, I don't know, maybe it's an overthought, but I just sort of like this notion of a loop to start things. And that's where the album starts.
Awesome. Well, let's take a quick listen to that. All right. Our next track is Gallows Poll, which I think probably most people are familiar with in one or another incarnation.
Yeah. And initially this album is something that I had thought about doing with a guy named Bob Keelahan from a now defunct Agnostic Mountain Gospel Choir, who are really good Alberta sort of death stomp gospel agnostic blues band. And I had sent him Gallows Poll, and you know, some of the tunes he gave the thumbs up to, and Gallows Poll got like the big red no from him. He's like, you can't do Gallows Poll, like everyone's just gonna think of Zeppelin when you're doing that. And in his defense, based on the demo, that would have been right, but I tweaked the words quite a bit, finding other versions. I like the versions where the mother and father show up and they're not bringing silver and gold. They're just coming to watch you die, right? This idea that you can become so defiled in this world that your own mother and father will abandon you and that sort of thing. And I guess the reason that I put this one up second was because a friend of mine had died a couple of years ago, and he was the guy I had made the first album with. And you know, we had been friends for a couple of years, and then we got to be sort of less close. And then you know, life happens, and he developed some health issues that you know, I don't want to get into. But he was big on Led Zeppelin, and so I wanted to do it for him. And one of the meanings it has for me is that I tried to help him as best I could by giving him as much money as I could. And in the end, that wasn't enough to save him from the gallows pole, right? Like, it's not that I regret the effort, but sometimes our best efforts won't be enough. So, you know, the money is still in the hangman's pocket, you know, sort of like it's being thrown down a wishing well at the end. And I like there was a very accidental thing that happened in the recording where, you know, my lap slide is feeding back, and I just sort of let that continue. And that's, to me, that's the anticipation of the gallows floor. I don't know, the scaffolding, whatever the trap door is. I think it's maybe called a trap door. You know, that when you're anticipating it. But then there was an artifact of a 12-string track, you know, from I guess a previous take. I didn't do a lot of takes of it, but it was, so it provides that sort of all at the end, the 12 strings sort of resolve it, place that's less stressful and quiet, because, you know, in the end, death comes to us in a place that's probably not stressful and quiet, that is stressful, or less stressful and more quiet when it finally happens.
Mm-hmm. Just breaking through.
And I liked the guitar tone. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good track. It actually reminded me, there's a Peter, Paul and Mary version of that song that I grew up with before I got into Zeppelin and stuff. Reminded me of that. So let's
Yeah, well, I was listening to sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was I was listening to John Jacob Niles, who's like this weird old guy who sang in a falsetto, and so the first couple of verses where the mother and father come to watch the person hang. That's from listening to John Jacob Niles.
Nice. All right, let's take a quick listen. All right, third track on the album is the title track for the album, "Trouble of This World." Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one that I learned from that Coen Brothers movie, The Lady Killers, where it's a sort of recurring song in that one. But I wanted to write more verses for it, just like I had written the last verse of Gallows Poll, to make it something that meant something specific for me. With Trouble of This World, I was trying to create like a tension between the chorus / refrain, where it's like I'm going up to heaven, essentially, paraphrasing, to see my mother or to see Jesus, what have you. But in the verses, you start thinking that this is maybe not a literal death, that the trouble of this world isn't something that I'm leaving for death, but rather this is like a cycle that happens in my life, and you can call that cycle recovery and relapse, or just the sense that everything passes, like both negative and positive. So and so there's this notion of like the way in which we get reborn all the time. The thousand deaths. It says I've died 1,000 times. I could die 1,000 more. I mean, that's something that I wrote to try to give that sense that this is a fluid thing, and that we're sort of works in progress. Mm-hmm. And I chose it as like the title because I felt it summed up a lot of what you were going to find on the album. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being sort of a little bit prescient because I released it on March 16th, just before like things were starting to get bad on the West Coast, March 16th, but it hadn't, the full enormity and gravity of the situation hadn't really hit us yet with coronavirus and such.
Yeah, it's definitely a fitting track for 2020, that's for sure.
Yeah, and there's been more trouble since then, and I suspect there is more to come, but
oh yeah, we're just getting started. Might be actually, this might be the time when we see this sort of gothic Americana and the death gospel become more mainstream, because
maybe it will be like it will bring out the flavor of our suffering, like a good sauce brings out the flavor in our food. But I mean, when I released it, I wasn't sure that people would be quite ready to wade into those waters to such an extent. And I think people, especially at first, like in April, were quite happy to distract themselves with other stuff. So, I mean, not that the album doesn't do all right on Spotify. It does as well as, anything I do. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe it'll catch on. Maybe it won't.
It'll become an anthem. So let's take a listen to Trouble of This World. Our next track, Glory in the Meeting House. Now, this is an instrumental.
Yeah, this is the only instrumental I've put out, but this is the second time I've put it out. So this is looking at music as a language, I guess, and the extent to which those languages those those ideas can change, because if people are really good at the internet, they can find me playing it in 1999 on an old reel-to-reel deck when I lived in Calgary for a year and a half. It was one of my favorite fiddle tunes. I don't listen to a lot of instrumental songs because, as might be clear by this point, I'm kind of wordy, and I really love the combination of good words with music. I just find it more transcendent usually, but this was a track that I learned. The only source material I have is an old Kentucky fiddle recording of a solo fiddler named it's a Winnipeg friend to play fiddle for me on this track. But so it's in a weird tuning, and I just sort of adapted it for banjo. And I guess what I enjoy about it is that it's mountain music, but it's also blues, and there's also like even the heartbeat of indigenous music in it. So it's sort of located at that fertile crossroads, and maybe it's interesting to go back if people find the old one. Like, I had released it as a fundraiser, but not on a CD or anything, and it's no longer available. But to see the way that it's changed, and the ideas shift, and we'll get to that maybe a bit later with some of the bonus tracks at the end, and the way that songs change because our lives bring to it those songs.
Oop. Lost you there for a sec. Let me see. I think you are muted.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
something happened, but we figured it out.
We're back.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's take a listen to Glory and the Meeting House. Track 5, Motherless Child. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the sound here is Skip James. I don't know if you're familiar with Skip James and the Bentonia blues sound. I mean, Skip had a really distinctive minor blues style, and I'm playing it on a 12-string, which he didn't play. And I don't think he ever played Motherless Child, but if he had, it would have sounded sort of like this. I mean, I wrote the second, so the first two verses are traditional, and I'm not pulling them from any particular source. I mean, it's a pretty common song. Sometimes they leave out the verse about how sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone, and I really liked that feeling, right? Like, because I've gone through like other people's death in the album already, but I wanted to explore that feeling of like of being almost gone. And I think then I write verses about feeling like the world's in the palm of my hand, but then letting it go. And that's vague. I mean, to me, that's like you're in control of something and you are voluntarily surrendering it, and that's probably not a good thing in this instance, but because it's then followed up with sometimes I think of the way that we fell. So for me, that's without wanting to be too specific about it, addiction's been a big theme in a lot of my the way that I reinterpret folk music. So I guess that's probably what I was trying to get at, but it could be any number of things for people to, my hope was to write it vague enough that people can bring their own experience to it in a way that would make sense for them. This one is this one is a harder one, and it's not going to be one that's going to get a lot of plays. It's long. It's longer than it ought to have been. Like, if I could go back, I wouldn't have repeated the sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Like, at the time, in the middle of the performance, I wanted to emphasize that, but it makes it over 5 minutes, and it I don't know, it's hard to be up for 5 minutes of anything sometimes. And I felt like I put a lot into the performance. Like, it's just recorded live. I'm doing the guitar and the vocals at the same time. And if you'll pardon the expression, I like shot my wad on it, and I think the refractory period on it is like would have been a year or two. So it wasn't something I wanted to re-record. I was like, well, you know, to the extent that it's imperfect, we all live it perfectly. That's all right.
There's an immediacy that I think you pick up with that live sound too. Sparse recordings, but there's a lot of depth to them.
Yeah, it wouldn't have sounded right if I had recorded the guitar first to make it sound better, and then the vocal. Like, it really needs to match what I'm doing vocally. And one of my quirks is that I never really sing things the exact same way all the time, which can make for a really good experience. It makes for the odd flub, but because I'm improvising as I go along, and the guitar part's all improvised, that it's impossible to not play a song like that live.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, let's take a listen to Motherless Child. Okay, next we have Long Gone, and I'm going to admit this song has been stuck in my head. This is it's an earworm on the album, at least for me. Want to tell us about Long Gone?
Yeah, this one was a lot of fun. It started out like the very first verse. I learned from a dulcimer recording of a dulcimer player in Kentucky named I.D. Stamper, and I don't know that he says booster. Like, he might be just like waiting for a freight train. Like, it's a fairly common song, but I liked the idea of a booster, like there's someone like doing a bump of something they shouldn't be doing and like losing their mind. So this is like another way for people to leave the world. And I think I was inspired in part by like growing up listening to Tom Waits.
Oh, nice.
So, you know, lines like bottle full of trouble and the devil in his eye. I mean, I could, to me, that's like a little wink towards Tom Waits. And because I think he would say something like that. And just the way in which I'm leaning into my peculiar vocal damage and the percussion as well. Like, so I mean, I recorded the lap slide first and added the banjo after, and, you know, tried to play some harmonica. I'm not much of a harmonica player, but it was fun in the breaks to use some homemade percussion. So I'd found some like wooden stakes in my garage from the old people who I bought the house from. They must have been related to a garden because they were tied to each other with twine, and I'm whacking them to make sounds, and we were hitting like a penny whistle to make like a more ding sound, and then I found a shovel that I was using for additional dings, and then Dylan, my son, who, you know, I'd been sort of sending tracks to, he was like, yeah, you know, and he helped out on some of the percussion. He told me like it also needed some brush strokes on the banjo skin, so like using the banjo like a drum. So it's a lot of fun, but at the same time, I mean, there's definitely some tragedy with our man John, you know, sort of ending up in the tree like old Mad Sweeney from Irish mythology.
All right, let's take a listen to Long Gone. So you're talking about the homemade percussion. I was thinking of Tom Waits. I think it's Big in Japan, where the percussion on that song is him attacking an old bureau, just slamming the draws in and out.
He had a instrument he called the conundrum, which was like it was a crucifix made of metal with like hammers dangling from it that he could whack at, and you know, he always wants to like bang hubcaps with hammers and stuff like that, especially starting around Bone Machine and later on.
Oh God, yeah. So one of my favorite stories, I think I might have been Bone Machine. When he was done with the mix of a song, he would go out to an old, like 88 Oldsmobile rotting in the yard and play it on the stereo on that. And if it sounded good in there, that's what he went with.
Well, that's sort of what you have to do. I mean, so I mix my stuff and, you know, master it as best I can on my own, but also sort of bouncing, like sending stuff to Dylan, who's in his early 20s, and he's got a pretty good ear too. And like the way that it's going to sound in these earbuds isn't the way it's going to sound in your car, isn't the way it's going to sound if you burn a CD and listen to it on a stereo with proper woofers. And so you, or in a mono source. So like, you know, it's kind of a nightmare you can't make it sound ideal on all of those things, but you know, you try and sort of shoot for the middle so it sounds decent on all of them, but it's not my skill. I just sort of blunder my way through it.
Let somebody else do the fine tuning.
No, unfortunately, it's just me.
It's just you. Our next track, I keep saying our, so I should say yours, because I had nothing to do with this album. Rocky Island.
Yeah, this one is actually my favorite one to listen to because, you know, by this point we've already gone through a lot of shit in the album, and it comes as a sort of respite for me, right? With the banjo starts out just a little thing that I wrote, and then especially when the harmonium kicks in, like Dylan, my son, played the harmonium, and it's a real simple song, but I just feel like everything's in the pocket. And when I say simple, I mean maybe not totally simple, because you know, the more I think about these songs, and I'm pulling verses from Rocky Island, but also from other songs, and I'm also rewriting some of the verse endings. You know, you start to wonder, like, it sounds optimistic at first, like, you know, we just need to cross the water and we're going to get there, and you know, my candy darling will be there. But he just keeps saying it, and you sort of wonder, like, maybe he's not going to get there, like maybe it's not going to happen. It's like one of those places where you keep saying you're going to get there, like Shady Grove, you know, which I recorded a couple albums ago. It's more about like the intention of going rather than actually getting there. And when you look at the verses, you know, it's someone who's bereft of something or other, and is missing someone, and is trying to get to her, and he's remembering her, and he's also has some issues with the urges, you know, to have like a number more drinks, and I don't know, and feeling like standing up on the hill and feeling like just nowhere looks like home, right? And so the song functions, though, I think, in my head as a sort of respite, like, you know, it's okay to sit with this intention of getting somewhere, even if you don't ultimately get there. I think it's good to have this. It's a more hopeful message than some of the previous songs, and especially Motherless Child. And it's a way of recharging the listeners' batteries for the second half of the album, which it's going to have some hard stuff in it for me, at least. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, so getting into the second half of the album, we start off with "Can't Keep From Crying."
Yeah, someone on YouTube had said something, comparing me to Blind Willie Johnson, and obviously I'm nowhere near Blind Willie Johnson, but I have like a little parlor guitar that I play, and it sort of sounds like his guitar, and I always liked this song. This is one of the few songs where I didn't claim an arrangement credit because I haven't rewritten it at all. And I'm really just sort of approximating what he did, just with better sound quality, because it's 2020 instead of 1930 something, or 20 something actually. I think it was 28. But yeah, and it's from the pantheon of Dead Mother songs. There's a lot of those in Americana and in gospel music. And in a sense, it makes sense that people, like, losing a mother is really hard, and because you're losing someone who knew like everything about you, at least when you were young, right? And if things were good for you anyway, loved you anyway. And so I think, not to be reductive about it, but some people seek that from religion, right? They want to confess and be forgiven and be loved. So I don't think it's an accident that there are so many Dead Mother songs, and it's a way of sort of coping with that loss. I love the melody of it. I like that it uses like major notes, even though it's in a sort of blues context. The not to be technical, but it's like a major third as opposed to like the flatted pentatonic third, minor third. And I don't know, it was fun to sing, and I tried to sing it fairly straight and fairly honest, and as much as possible in my own accent and all that.
Okay, let's take a listen. All right, our next track at least sounds more upbeat. God is Not Dead, He's Still Alive, and you've got someone accompanying you on this song.
Yeah, that's Juliana Young. So Juliana is my son's partner, and I'd heard Juliana sing Bob Dylan's "Girl from the North Country," and I'm like, that's a beautiful voice, and I need to exploit that. So this was a song that I had in mind. Now, I'd heard this song in 1997. I was in North Carolina at a place called the Swannanoa Gathering, which is sort of like how I picked up some extra banjo skills, and I actually sing about it later in the album on Into Grace. But I'd heard Ginny Hawker and Tracy Schwartz sing it, and they sang the crap out of it. And I remember, 10 years went down the line, and I found that they had never recorded it. So I emailed Tracy, and he told me about the Cook duet who had sang it, and they might have written it. To be honest, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, I need to find that. Album was out of print, and then I forgot about it, and I emailed him like 8 years later. I'm like, what was that album again? He's like, oh yeah, I remember you. Well, like, write it down this time. And so I ended up finding it on eBay, and so it had been my intention to sing it for quite a while. Now, so obviously I add the verse about how God kicked me when I was down, and it was in the demo version in 2017, it went a bit further, and the verse after was "He fucked me half to death," which is great fun to sing. And you know, especially when I could feel him in my hands, feel him in my feet, you know, feel him all over me. So this song was intended to be sort of comic relief, but you know, though I'm not religious, I also didn't want to be super offensive to anyone, so I kind of chickened out. But if you hear me sing it live, then you'll probably get the more explicit version.
For what it's worth, at least me personally, I'm a preacher's son, and I'm not very religious, but I've always found contentious relationships with the Almighty to be much more interesting than.
Yeah, and I should say, you know, this is a character, right? This is someone blaming God for his problems, sort of like, you know, Fear and Loathing. Like, did you see what God did, man? God didn't do that, you idiot. You know, like, so, you know, we're all to some extent responsible for ourselves, and so it was more me exploring the idea of someone both blaming hardship and attributing good things to something other than themselves. I thought that was an interesting idea.
Excellent. Okay, the next track is Our Little Things for Vic Chestnut. And I'm going to be honest, I had never heard of Vic Chestnut, and I have a feeling that's a rabbit hole I'm going down next.
Yeah, you got some homework to do, buddy.
I do.
Start with Is the Actor Happy, and then go to West of Rome. Those are really good albums. So Vic was a singer-songwriter from Georgia. He took his own life. I'm sorry if that's not the right term anymore. Sometime in the late 2000s. But the song itself isn't about Vic. It's the sound that is for Vic. It's like because he's gone, and the writing style to some extent I think owes a lot to Vic Chestnut. It's really about me, but it's written in his key, so to speak, and so, you know, our man, the speaker there, is he's in a bad relationship where he's just sort of picking away at somebody who may or may not be based on me. And so it's about that, and it's about a really bad way out of a relationship at the end, which is you know, rubbing some tar on your wings and flying too high. So like making bad choices so that people run for the hills to be sort of oblique about it. Yeah, and I just enjoyed you know, playing. This is, you know, a straight, more minor key song with some electric guitar, which I'm not particularly good at, but I liked exploring the tone. And the other thing about Vic is that he always played a nylon string guitar, so I made sure to borrow one. He was confined to a wheelchair, and he had only partial use of some of his fingers, so like he did the best he could with making up his sort of own chords in that. But he was really talented, like just an incredible lyricist and melody writer and all of it. Cool. It gets this is one of those songs that reviewers like, which get like very few plays on you know, streams and all that. Maybe it's not a playlist sort of song, but I'm glad that like some people like it. And to be honest, This wasn't written for Uncle Sinner. This was written for my own songwriter projects. Like Uncle Sinner is normally based more in Americana and traditional music, and trying to look at traditional lyrics as though and form a poem or lyric out of them, something that's sort of a little bit more dense. And so this is me cheating a little bit and adding adding one that's not based around traditional music in any way.
Okay, let's take a listen. The next song that follows this is That Suits Me. So tell us what suits you.
What suits me is the R.L. Burnside Bump-A-Chunk. I just love doing that. I'd borrowed my my Uncle Jeff's big semi-hollow Gibson and cranked it up as loud as my wee amp can go, and just really enjoying the groove on that one. This one is supposed to be, its function on the album is to provide people with a little energy and relief from some of the heavier topics. I mean, it's comic relief to a certain extent. You know, it's great fun to sing, you know, the rich man died, he lived so well, when he died he got a home in hell. That's a verse I can stick into any number of songs, and it exists in, you know, any number of songs. But yeah, so this one's more about the body and the rhythm, and, you know, a little bit of lead guitar, but having a chorus behind me was fun. So that was Dylan and Juliana and their friends, Alex and Molly. So I had them arranged around a single mic, and they would do a clap, you know, track, and then they would do the harmonies, which replicated where I had learned the song from, which was oh man, I'm gonna blank on it. I don't know. I learned it from someone or other, but they're very good. Yeah, Clarence Ashley, I think, and I just can't remember the other people, but so there's a chorus of them sort of singing the That Suits Me part, and it's if you could have seen me recording the vocal by myself like a lunatic in my basement, I mean, I was you know, my arms were out at my sides, and my body was swaying around, and I was right into it. It was a lot of fun.
You can feel the energy in the song.
Thanks.
Okay, so next is Into Grace. And,
are we there already?
Yeah.
This is another one that isn't, strictly speaking, an Uncle Sinner song that I snuck on, but it fit the themes of the album of you know, loss and death. And this is a rare example of me writing something that's quite straightforward, in the sense that it's autobiographical. Every word of it is true. So I'd gone down to North Carolina in 1997, and you know, and my roommate was Alex, a guy named Alex Hooker, really nice guy, and he let me stay at his place after the banjo camp ended. He did run over his fiddle and announce that he was going to need to get drunk. That was at a party in Virginia that he took me to. Beautiful place. Like, we were up on a hillside playing like fiddles and banjos and guitars, and you could just see the hills all around. And so it was beautiful, but it was also a really hard time for me as we get to in the third verse, because, you know, I was newly married. My mom had died. I was 23. My son was born like 2 weeks later. Sorry, 2 weeks before she died. So, I mean, at least she got to meet him. She had said this thing that I just sort of filed away, which was like, you know, one goes out and another comes in. And to me, that's That's the saddest thing on any Uncle Sinner album. And people in my family who had heard that were like, oh, that's so wise. But like, I knew her, and I knew that sort of devastating bitterness behind those words, and the extent to which she was afraid to like sort of get too close to him because she knew she was on her way out. Her middle name was Grace, which is why it's called Into Grace. And that river, that new river at the end, that's the oldest river in the States, as I've said elsewhere, you know, it's the one that flows from life into death. And so it's a really hard third verse for me to sing. But then you get to New River Train, which is like, you know, same old train that got me here. It's going to bring me back again. And it's not necessarily a message that we're all going to be reincarnated and everything's fine. But you should know that, like, my son Dylan's a really good songwriter and singer, and this was the first time that he'd sung in front of me when he recorded the harmony part, because it would, you know, I said it would mean a lot to me if you would join me. I already had the harmony part, like I'm there singing the same harmony, but just to sort of add his voice in. He's the one that sort of sounds like, you know, Elliott Smith doing a harmony. And it was really special because, you know, in the end, the train that brought us here will bring us back again. That's getting into the idea that even though people leave us, they echo down through the generations, right? So my mom had a beautiful, clear singing voice. I inherited her sense of pitch, and, you know, Dylan has some of that, although his mother is very talented as well. And so just, it provides a bit of resolution for me that then gets explored further in the next track.
And that is the last track on the album, Jubilee. Not counting you get, there's a couple of bonus tracks too, but
yeah. So Jubilee is it's a fairly simple song I learned from listening to Gene Ritchie, but I slowed it way down, and I'd been singing sort of this altered melody of it since I was in my mid-20s, and so this is something that I sang to Dylan when he was young, and so that's how the album resolves the themes of creation and death. Is that, you know, the people go, but they're sort of leaking into future generations, and there's a gentleness to the track that, you know, it's not a hugely popular track for fans who want to hear like Long Gone and Gallows Poll, but it was important to me because it's my own resolution of these things, and it's, you know, basically the only resolution for death is to, you know, acknowledge that, you know, we sort of ripple out into the generations that follow us. And so this is just me singing to the generation that's gonna follow me, and recognizing that I am to some extent echoing people who preceded me.
And it really brings that whole circle theme to life. I could see that now, where you're not ending where you began, but it's that whole thread that's running through this.
Yeah.
All right, let's listen to Jubilee. And so the album ends with you've got 2 bonus tracks on here, and these are from earlier albums too, right? Jack of Diamonds and Long Steel Rail.
Yeah, those were both songs on the first album, Ballads of Mental Breakdowns, that was out in 2008. And they are there because the album is dedicated to Matt, who I was talking about in Gallows Poll. and they're a way of showing how the songs have changed because I've changed, but they're also a way of pointing out his absence because he really, on those tracks on the first album, he really filled them out, right? And so I intentionally left them as bare as possible so that, you know, he could play along to some extent. So Jack of Diamonds, do you want to just talk about them together?
Sure.
Yeah, so Jack of Diamonds, I mean, started out as a gambling song, but I rewrote a lot of it so that it's more about a person who can't get high enough, right? and I was just enjoying like those songs where I have no idea what voice is gonna and because the melodies being made up as I go along. And so it's has live because the guitar has to roughly, you know, maybe not note for note, but be up. Guitar has to be on the same page as the vocal, and the vocal's really stretching out a bit. That in a way that, I mean, I enjoy singing. I don't know that it's fun to listen to, but it is fun for me, and I liked the tone of it that I got on that one. And then Long Steel Rail is. Again, I think you can read some, it's floating verses, but they're floating verses around a theme, and that they both of those songs end with the notion that I'm going to keep doing this till I die. And if that thing happens to be an unhealthy thing that you're doing, you know, slamming down the hammer of something, or not being high enough, then maybe that's a sort of grim idea. But there's also the sense that these songs and looking at these songs is something that I'm going to keep doing till I die. And so, and in the Long Steel Rail, I added in some verses from another song called Ryland Spencer that, so it follows, it doesn't follow the source material as much as the first Long Steel Rail did. Again, like neither of these ones tend to get singled out, but they're important just to me on a thematic level to put them on the album. And like honestly, in retrospect, I would have just put them on a CD if and have those like be the incentive for people to buy a CD. Like right now, on my Bandcamp site, I'm not shipping out CDs. I live in like the worst coronavirus neighborhood of Winnipeg right now, and I don't feel like going to the post office if I can avoid it. But I did want people to hear them, so I ended up sort of relenting and putting it on Spotify and just figuring, well, you know, so few people will hear it if it's just put out on the CD that I thought I would put it on. I tried to get them labeled as Jack of Diamonds #2 and Long Steel Rail #2, but that seemed to be beyond logistical capabilities of the aggregator.
Technology does not always work in our favor.
Yep.
No, it's an amazing album altogether. I really enjoyed listening to it. One of the things that I appreciate about what you're doing is taking these traditional music and, you know, rather than just yet another version, it becomes your music. You're on this, which I think is really cool.
Well, so that's part of what interests me about it. Folk music is, you know, minimalistic, so you can import your own experience into it. And my question was like, to what extent do these American folk songs, to what extent can they reflect on my experience as you know, a guy in Winnipeg, Canada, and I've found that it's really versatile. I mean, I don't know how many more Uncle Sinner albums I have, because like a lot of these songs are ones that I've been carrying around for a while, but I'm sure it's Trouble of This World isn't the last word from me. It's just, you know, I need a bit of a refractory period, I guess.
Yeah. So I know we're in a very difficult and strange time right now, and I know at least your southerly neighbors here are descending into complete and utter chaos. But any chance or hopes of being back on the road or some point down the line?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I was ever on the road. I mean, I did some shows in Europe. Um, they were a small thing. I don't know. I would like to do that, and certainly there's a chance of it. But I'm not a great self promoter, and I'm certainly not a tour manager. Like, I have no idea how to do any of that. I don't know how people get shows. I mean, I've tried to do it and have had some limited success, but it's hard. I mean, the nature of being a musician on the internet largely is that you have some really dedicated fans, but they're all over the place and they're not really clustered anywhere. And so you kind of need a well-known act to be like, hey, I need you to open for me. You're great, or something like that. And I don't know how to make that happen. So
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, I'll do my best.
Hopefully we'll hear some. Definitely. Have you thought about doing any streaming shows at all?
Yeah, I've done a bunch of them. They're on my Uncle Center Music Instagram page. I tend to use Instagram for live streams. So there are 3 of them that are up permanently. If you swipe to the live stream part. I've done about 5, but I kept 3 up. And so yeah, if you want to hear like the explicit version of God's Not Dead, that was on the latest one. And I also do songs that I sometimes do songs that I don't have any intention of recording, but which I just feel might be fun to play in that moment.
Excellent. Well, we'll check that out. I want to thank you for coming on our show today. Appreciate you taking the time to break down the album with us, and keep it up. I look forward to hearing more from you.
Okay, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.